Today on Listen Up, paying the price for our economic mess, wrestling with responsibility for financial collapse that hits close to home. That's next. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Duick. Today, we'll tackle our collective financial future from a values perspective. Experts say we're in the midst of the gravest crisis in our global financial system in over 70 years. Governments are trying to cope, buyouts and bailouts by the billions, stimulus strategies amounting to over $2 trillion. But that doesn't necessarily mean relief is in sight.
We are not going to get relief by turning back to the very same policy that for the last 8 years doubled the national debt and threw our economy into a tailspin. We can't embrace the losing formula that says only tax cuts will work for every problem we face, that ignores critical challenges like our addiction to foreign oil, or the soaring costs of healthcare, or falling schools and crumbling bridges and roads and levees,
or the growing numbers of people out of work. Today, we look for a spiritual perspective on values that are being challenged to change in order to cope. In a moment, an author who says equating self-esteem with what we could buy on credit is what launched the global mess. We'll talk with him about instincts needed now to survive tough times together. And surviving together is the focus of Christian leaders who are joining forces to say economic initiatives should be based on moral imperatives. Kairos, a Canadian ecumenical group, says combating poverty, ill health, and climate change are moral issues facing any bailout or stimulus package. Today, we'll take you to Washington to hear from a gathering of prominent American Christians who say our economy and our priorities must be reordered.
You know, of late, we have heard a lot about Wall Street and Main Street. Our concern is people who are living in the street or have no street address at all.
We'll take you back to Washington in a few minutes, but first, there's a new Canadian book that points to the moral issue behind the economic mess we're in. The Ego Boom, a Canadian bestseller, says we're a society that's far too narcissistic for our own good. Joining me now is author Steve Maish. Steve, thank you for being with us, and you think this has all started, the economic mess, because of our egos. Explain that.
Well, I think it's a huge part of it. Put it to you that way. If the economic crisis that we're in right now can be likened to a powder keg, over the course of generations, as we've become more and more focused on ourselves, that has added more and more gunpowder to that powder keg. And then we've seen a couple of sparks over the past few years, in the past 12 months in particular, that's really brought it to a head. But I think the thing that filled up that powder keg is the very idea that the things that we consume are not so much about satisfying needs. They're not even so much about satisfying wants anymore. That over the past 10 years in particular, we've internalized this idea that consumption and buying needs to be a form of self-expression. And in fact, the way that we express ourselves through the things that we buy is the most important project that we're all on in our lives. And I think that created the economic crisis.
You call this the you sell.
Yes.
In other words, it's all about selling me and my identity.
That's right. Selling an idealized idea of yourself back to you. And it's a shift that we've seen in marketing, particularly over the past 10 years. Old-style marketing used to work on what we call an aspirational model, where the marketers came to you and said, you're not quite good enough, you're not quite successful enough or slim enough, but we have a product that is going to help you. And we aspired to that product and we consumed it. In the past 10 years, the you sell has become a much more dominant form of advertising, and it's what we call affirmational.
You are great the way you are.
Exactly.
You're richer than you think.
Yes, yeah. You are wonderful. No one knows what you need and what you want better than you. And all you need to do is broadcast your wonderfulness, your specialness to the world. And this product can help you do that.
And it just flips like dominoes. It has gone all the way to our credit cards. As Canadians, we've long thought we are more frugal than others in North America. You've just uncovered some research that says we've increased credit card debt loads 40%?
That's exactly right. The 40% since 1996, I believe. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but the growth has been astonishing, running at about 10% a year in personal debt compared to increases in our income of about 5% a year.
And you write that even the church, which should have rang an alarm bell at this, got sucked right into this.
Well,
we lost our moral guides.
In part by out of necessity. That's the one thing I would say for their defense, is that as we've seen institutions erode, any institution relies on people as its lifeblood. And many churches have been seeing attendance decline for decades. Generation by generation, its hold on people has gotten less and less. And in order to fill the pews, in order to remain healthy as organizations, we argue in the book that many faith-based communities have fallen victim to the same kind of messaging.
So instead of perhaps saying the craving that you have for materialism to set an identity for you is sin, is wrong, that just doesn't even hit the radar anymore.
Well, the problem with that is that there are a lot of people that have been raised in the era of the ego boom aren't terribly interested in hearing what sin is. They aren't terribly interested in hearing the ways that they have not lived up to the standards.
So we have a great values shift challenge before us. Have you predicted where this is going to go now as we are fully up to our neck in the mess that we've created? How's it going to play out?
Well, my worry from the economic perspective is that right now we're engaged in a massive public policy enterprise aimed at continuing the very things that got us into this mess.
Because of the bailout. We're just doing it on a massive global scale now.
Absolutely. We're in the process of printing money, bailing out banks, removing toxic assets from bank balance sheets, and encouraging the banks to lend. If you watch the headlines, one of the great concerns both in Washington and Ottawa right now is pushing the banks to lend. Whatever you do, don't scale back. Make sure that money is available. And that worries me. That's a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you approach to economic policy. I think ultimately, over the next several years, we are going to have to get used to the fact that public consumption, consumer spending cannot continue at the same kind of pace that we saw in the past 10 years. It can't and it shouldn't. All we're doing then is delaying the reckoning. We are not dealing with the fact that we've got fundamental problems with our finances and our approach to consumption. And I think one way or another, we're going to have to get our heads around that and deal with the consequences. And it means slower growth. It means a little bit more frugality, but that's not the end of the world.
Thank you very much. When we come back, we'll head back to Washington, where churches are banding together to ask the White House to keep its promises to take care of those most in need. That's next. Well, at Listen Up, we'd love to hear from you. Your voicemail, your email, your video clips. Pop by our website and answer this week's question. Do you see bailouts and stimulus packages as good or bad? Why? Write to us at listenuptv.com. With the size of the economic problem facing America, that country's churches have united for work on the challenge. The broadest, most inclusive coalition of Christian churches and organizations ever is asking the White House to keep its promise to cut down domestic poverty as part of its stimulus package. The numbers are shocking. 37 million people in the U.S. live below the poverty line. Another 1.5 million Canadians live in poverty. This in two of the wealthiest nations the world has ever seen. This group calls that a scandal, and they want to see a change. Calling themselves Christian Churches Together, or CCT, they're asking the government to set new priorities to overcome poverty and to take action now.
The biblical teaching about God's special concern for the poor demands that a bold stimulus and an economic recovery plan, and here's the key, must prioritize the pressing needs of vulnerable and low-income Americans.
We've declared in the statement that we made together that poverty is a moral failure.
We want to change the definition of dealing with the poor and change it from a concept of charity to the concept of investment. For as we invest in the poor, we get positive returns. And equality has not to do just with human nature. It has to do with the integrity of human beings.
Business as usual will not get us there. Politics as usual will not get us there.
There are some people who might say, well, you know, you can't deal with poverty now. First, you got to deal with the economy. But if we're trying to stimulate the economy, there's no better way to stimulate the economy than to provide food assistance for hungry people or extended unemployment benefits for unemployed people. That money immediately gets recycled, spent, and stimulates the economy. And if we are trying to invest in economic recovery and growth, there is no investment that has a higher rate of return than investment in nutrition, health, and education for all of our people.
It is typical of political leaders to focus on the middle class, and we too care about the middle class. However, it is our religious responsibility to make sure the poor, who are so close to the heart of God, are not left out and left behind in this severe economic crisis. They are already in crisis. So we don't recall Jesus saying, I was in the middle class and lost my 401k. He said, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was a stranger, I was sick, and I was in prison. As you've done to the least of these, you have done to me.
We've declared in the statement that we made together that poverty is a moral failure, and that the ongoing scandal of poverty in our country is not just a political issue, but is a moral and spiritual issue. And that because of the nature of our faith and the witness of the Word of God, we are called as never before to act together and to speak with one voice, saying, again at this time, poverty must be eliminated. Our voice is consistent. It's stronger and more unified than ever before, as the whole Christian community from every spectrum of theological belief is now saying, poverty is a moral disgrace, and we're compelled, working with government and working in our own communities, to see that it is overcome.
It would seem that the White House is listening. President Obama recently announced he's expanding the Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships created by George W. Bush. The council includes Jim Wallace and William Shaw and will focus on issues of poverty and social justice.
As Christian churches together, we say with confidence that our faith tells us, our national heritage tells us, that when we join our hands together in this way, and when we make up our minds, and when we join spirit and heart together, we can make a dent. We can see poverty reduced by 50% in the next 10 years. Now is the time.
When Listen Up returns, we'll hear from a Roman Catholic priest who's also an economics expert. He says government bailouts are a bad idea.
The amount of money we're talking about is really taking it for people who are not even born yet.
Closed captioning provided by Duca Financial Services Credit Union. Discover more affordable banking at duca.com.
Well, at Listen Up, we'd love to hear from you. Your voicemail, your email, your video clips. pop by our website and answer this week's question. Do you see bailouts and stimulus packages as good or bad? Why? Write to us at listenuptv.com. We're back exploring a spiritual perspective on government bailouts and stimulus packages. Father Robert Sirico has devoted a good part of his life to educating people about fundamental economic principles. He's with the Acton Institute, and I sat with Father Sirico in Washington recently to learn more. Father Sirico, there's just been a lot of money flowing through the U.S. I don't know if you've got machines just printing it for this, but between the bailout and now the $1 trillion stimulus package, what are your concerns about the kind of engagement that's happening here on this level of money?
I'm reminded of a little citation from Friedrich Bastiat. He was a writer in the 19th century in France. And he said, the great myth, or the state is the great myth, whereby everyone thinks they can live at everyone else's expense. So when we talk about finances, when we talk about money, I think it's good to kind of go back to some just very fundamental ideas. The state, the government, the social service apparatus, whatever you want to call it, the social assistance state, has no money. Any money that's going to be redistributed by any political or governmental entity is going to come from somewhere. And there is no real money if you're just printing money, as you said, if you're just printing it, that's not real money. What that does is deflate the value of all money that exists in everyone's pocket. It's one of the most insidious forms of taxation because it's an invisible form of taxation. And it hits the poorest people and people on fixed incomes the worst, because if you have $10 in your pocket and they increase the money supply by 10%, let's say, then you really only have $9 in your pocket, even though there are 10 individual dollar bills. It's been deflated or inflated.
Father Sirico calls the economic plans a mistaken notion that could ultimately lead to radical inflation.
Right now, the way, if the stimulus package follows the pattern of the bailout, you're going to be giving money to sectors that you really don't know need it, and you may be giving it to those that don't need it and overlooking those that do need it. A market economy can better do that, and the amount of money we're talking about is really taking it for people who are not even born yet, because those are the people who are going to have to pay for this.
His concern is that we're setting a climate for people to think everyone can live at someone else's expense.
All of these questions of economy are really moral in root. And so I think it's obligatory to become somewhat informed about how the economy functions, because good sentiments and prayers alone will not help the poor. What we have to do is know how to produce wealth. And I think to the extent that religious leaders have insulted and criticized unjustly people who are operative in a market economy, they're doing a disservice to the poor, because the poor will only be employed, the poor will only be fed to the extent that the economy itself is productive.
Prosperity is not the norm for the world, says Father Sirico. It's not natural law to have money or provision. It's a condition that occurs only when people work.
You can't lower the rate of poverty without increasing the rate of productivity, and you don't increase the rate of productivity by increasing taxes on the very vehicle that will be productive, that is the market economy. If you overregulate and overtax the productive economy, you're not going to reduce poverty. No one ever reduced poverty by socialism, and I give you the whole experiment with the Soviet Union as an example of that. What you need to do is free the economy by lowering taxes, lowering regulation, increasing the opportunity for trade so that goods and services can come into our countries at lower cost than the cost that's demanded by trade unions and other regulatory interventions into the market.
If all that leaves you feeling a little muddled, you're not alone. Clearly, there are a lot of different economic theories out there, but according to Father Sirico, there are some practical things we can all do to prepare for what's coming, whatever that may be.
The first thing we need to do is be more regular in our prayer life. That is, to really bring ourselves before God and understand His infinite wisdom and His love for us by praying, by confessing our sins, by acknowledging His grace, by adoring Him. A new perspective emerges so that material things are not the be-all and end-all of human life. Consumerism is evil not because material goods are evil, but because in consumerism we are worshiping and serving the created thing rather than the Creator Himself. So I think it is very healthy for us, and we may as well do it because it's going to be difficult anyway financially. We may as well enter into this materially challenging moment by detaching ourselves from material goods, by looking more deeply at what the important things in our lives are. I think that having a sense of solidarity with those who are in need also generates within us a sense of well-being, a sense of appropriateness to life. And so solidarity with the poor, helping people.
Coming up, what might God want us to learn in this time of economic challenge? Those thoughts in The Wrap. If you missed last week's show, go to our website. You'll find all of this season's programs archived there for viewing. And while you're there, find our spiritual helps online for your questions about the economy or life. You'll find us at listenuptv.com. Money is a big concern here. We relish the chance to be the news show that looks for a Christian perspective on economic stimulus packages and its impact on our lives. It catches my attention that Jesus spoke more on money than any other subject. In the Bible, there are over 2,000 verses on how to handle money. That outweighs advice on prayer by 4 to 1. Jesus taught that how we handle money impacts how we relate to God. What we own and how we feel about our stuff competes with the mind of God and what God wants to own in us. Two economic systems operate in the world, God's and mine. And since so much of our lives revolve around money, our spiritual health and our financial health can't be separated. They deeply impact each other. So it's just like the character of God to use this economic meltdown as an opportunity for a spiritual exchange. We've put some resources on this, free for you, at our website at listenuptv.com. For all of us here, I'm Lorna Duick. Thanks for watching. Following a recent show, Faith in Obama, Barbara wrote, I hope that President Obama will follow his faith to help him make godly decisions. I am not yet convinced of this. Write to us with your news and views at listenuptv.com.